The next selection is Maine's Black Future, conceptualized and created by Genius Black for the Maine Monitor.
Black Future.
My name is Genius Black.
My name is Adilah Muhammed.
And you are listening to Maine's Black Future. More from Adilah and Genius in a moment. Now, a story from Maine's unique Black history. John Brown Russuwurm was born in 1799 in Jamaica. His father, also named John, was a land-owning English merchant, and his mother was a Creole or black Jamaican woman. His mother died when the son was young, and John remained in Jamaica until moving to Quebec, Canada in 1807. Later, the father and son came to Portland, Maine in the year 1812, when the city was still part of Massachusetts. The father, John R. Russwurm, married a widow named Susan Blanchard the next year. Susan convinced her husband to give the son, previously known as John Brown, their family's last name, Russwurm. John Brown Russuwurm, the son, was accepted fully into this blended family, and they lived together until the death of his father in 1815. John continued as an integral member of the family, remaining close to his stepmother. She eventually remarried, making William Hawes John's stepfather. Moving forward in time, John Brown Russuwurm attended Hebron Academy in Maine, starting in 1819, graduating in his early 20s. Hebron Academy, founded in 1804, is a small, independent college preparation boarding school, one of the nation's very oldest, and historically inclusive and rigorous. Then he spent time teaching in Philadelphia, teaching at the African Free School in New York, and teaching at the African School in Boston. Then he came back to Maine, where his family helped him enroll into Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. At Bowdoin, John studied solid geometry, Latin, Greek, philosophy, and was required to complete prayers and recitations daily before breakfast. He was invited into Bowdoin's Distinguished Athenian Society, a dues-sponsored society of writers. John attended Bowdoin with future United States President Franklin Pierce and renowned American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Russwurm graduated Bowdoin College on September 6, 1826, becoming Bowdoin's first Black graduate and the third Black college graduate in the United States. He spoke at the 1826 commencement, delivering a powerful and bold writing named The Condition and Prospect of Haiti, with the world and certainly Americans still trembling from the fear of Haiti's Black-led violent revolution, also known as creating freedom. John Brown Russuwurm included the following words in his culminating message. It is in the irresistible course of events that all men who have been deprived of their liberty shall recover this previous portion of their indefeasible inheritance. It is in vain to stem the current. Degraded men will rise in his native majesty and claim his rights. They may be withheld from him now, but the day will arrive when they must be surrendered. After college, in 1827, we find Russwurm headed to New York City, where roughly 10% of the northern United States free Black people live. In March of this year, Russwurm and co-editor Samuel Cornish published the first edition of Freedom's Journal, America's first Black-owned publication centered on the abolition of enslavement. Due to his history of traveling and his belief that Black people would live better lives in Africa, John immigrated to Liberia in 1830. John served as colonial secretary, editor of the Liberia Herald, and superintendent of Liberia's capital, Monrovia. In 1836, he became the first Black governor of Maryland in Africa, the colony that would become Liberia. He was governor until his death in 1851. Personally, as genius, hearing about Russwurm when I arrived at Bowdoin College in the fall of 2000 started me on a path of deep connection with the state of Maine. John's brilliance and ultimate decision to immigrate to Africa fueled my passion and connection to Maine. Think about that as you consider the state of Maine's unique Black history and as we create Maine's Black future. Connecting the state of Maine's rich Black history to Black changemakers weaving Maine's Black future today. Today, I'm talking to Adilah Muhammed, an activator and entrepreneur based in Maine. She is an experienced coalition builder, particularly among multi-ethnic organizations, solidifying Black cultural infrastructure inside Maine. She is a real estate investor, founder and executive director of the Third Place Maine, and chair of the board of directors of Maine Community Foundation. She is one of the 2021 Maine Biz Women to Watch and a 2022 Maine Magazine Mainer of the Year. I'm excited to introduce y'all. Adilah came to Maine in the year 2001. Adilah, where are you from?
Oh, I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia, straight from the deck.
Hey. So you grew up in Decatur, right?
Yeah.
Describe to me a little bit about what it was like growing up there.
Oh, gosh. Decatur, Georgia in the 80s. Decatur, Georgia in the 80s, it was like the rising tide of like Black excellence. You know, DeKalb County, Georgia is where Black folks came to thrive. I think, I don't know the statistics, but it's like it was at one time one of the wealthiest Black counties in the United States. We weren't necessarily part of it, but, you know, I went to school in Decatur through elementary school, high school, and, you know, it was just a great place to grow up.
And I love that recognition of the rising tide of Black excellence, and that rising tide doesn't carry everyone up in the exact same way, but it really does matter.
Yeah, because I wasn't necessarily a part of that rising tide. You know, the cab is a big county. So gotcha. I was on the other side. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, but we were lower middle class. Understood.
Talk to me, did you grow up gardening?
Yes. My dad was an avid gardener. We planted every summer, and our garden was like the center of like our social life because we didn't go out much. My mom was fairly protective, so we didn't play out with neighborhood friends or anything. But people would always come to the house to get something from the garden, and that's how I really got to know my dad's coworkers because we didn't have people over to the house, but they would come over, you know, walk through the garden, and that's kind of like how I saw my, you know, social life, saw my dad interact with people, saw my mom interact with people, because we didn't see that other than like at the mosque or with other family members. So it was a big part of who I am.
And then what were y'all growing in the garden?
Oh, what didn't we grow? We grew corn, collards, turnips, tomatoes, okra, string beans, squash, zucchini, garlic, onions, potatoes, sweet potatoes. We grew everything.
Yeah.
So it was every spot was taken, and I just remember, you know, my dad always having these complex conversations about before he'd plant, he'd take a seed and show me the anatomy of the seed, and talk about the importance of seeds and saving seeds and how one day people are going to be rushing back to be able to grow their own food. So yeah, my dad and I connected in the garden. That was our thing.
I love that your dad was planting that with you. I remember talking to you about growing up gardening and in Decatur. And then you told me that you always had this affinity or love for Maine, which I thought was interesting. And I would ask, how did you first hear about Maine? Do you recall?
Yeah, so there was, it was Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Yes.
I wish I knew which episode it was, but they were somewhere in Maine, and it looked absolutely lovely. And then they mentioned that Maine had mild summers, and this was like during the summertime, drenched in sweat, thinking like, okay, what's mild? I asked my dad, what does mild mean? And he was like, it doesn't get that hot. And I was just like, okay, yeah, I want to go there. In the summertime, it doesn't get that hot.
Yeah.
And then I saw like the oceans and stuff. And so like there's this space behind our garden that is actually near where we used to bury our animals. It was like just a little open, shady space behind our garden, which always stayed cool. And so like I would always pretend like that was my my summer home, my cabin in Maine. And so when we go outside and play, my sister and I, we'd go over there and be like, we're about to go to Maine. And it was my cabin. I owned it. So
Yes.
she was visiting me. So yeah. So that's just a weird way Maine entered into my life. And
So I have this super cute image of young Adilah vacationing in Maine via the cabin that's apparently imaginarily in your backyard, but it's cool there in the spot you found.
oh yeah, it was cool and shady.
What? I just think that's brilliant. And it means obviously that you were kind of fantasizing about and playing within your mind a life in Maine and getting away.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that I wasn't thinking about it like from being a kid and through teenage years and everything else in between. It was just kind of a thing in my head at that early stage. But Maine would pop up here and there, and I'd be like, I remember that. Nice place to go. Another piece of that story, too, was like Fabio was huge in the 80s. You remember Fabio?
I
It was
do.
on all the novels and stuff. And I was like, oh, maybe I can get a Fabio or something. So I had... So I made up a husband and everything, and he was Italian. My husband happens to be half Italian, but he's no Fabio, but he...
I'm sure he is amazing.
He's pretty good looking, but yeah, that's funny. But he is from Maine, and so in some ways I kind of willed myself towards this direction.
I believe that. And aside from growing up being young and kind of where we just started, I remember talking to you a little bit about college and school, but you went to school, I believe, in Greencastle, Indiana?
Yeah, Greencastle, Indiana.
Yeah. And what school?
DePaul with a W. DePaul University. I always say that because a lot of people who aren't familiar with the university confuse it with DePaul in Chicago.
But this is DePaul with
DePaul.
the W.
Yeah.
All right, I put the Texas accent, DePaul.
Where the Dannies go.
And what did you study there?
I studied French and economics, and I took a lot of courses in government as well.
After college, for you had like a lot happening at once, right? It's like you got married and like came to Maine.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of in a swoop, it sounded like.
Yeah. The day after I graduated, I came to Maine. Yeah. So I got married actually while I was in college. And so my last year in college, I was already married and on my way here. I think, yeah, I also did an internship at a Maine International Trade Center during our J term. So I had already kind of like scoped it out.
Okay.
Too.
Okay. And then I noticed that for you weren't trying to take a rest between. You wanted to utilize your degree and get right into stuff. Can you tell me what you kind of started with in Maine?
Well, I first started out, I wanted to go directly into finance. So I applied for a few jobs, didn't get the job initially, sent in my resume a second time with my husband's last name, got an interview. I quickly decided that maybe I should try something that is a little bit different and give me a broader experience. So I started out working with Hannaford Brothers Company, their retail management training program.
Hannaford, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And their retail management training program really like showed you every facet of the company. You know, you got trained everywhere from, you know, being a cashier, you know, receiving, pharmacy. So we learned everything. And the beauty in that was that I learned how to manage people from like 15 years old to 80 something.
Yeah.
So it was a huge opportunity to learn a business and just the various facets of a company.
It sounds like a very wide breadth of perspective that you gained by working with Hannaford in that capacity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to this day, I use a lot of what I learned.
Shout out. That's awesome. Learning HR, learning management, learning these different aspects. And then you got pregnant?
Oh, yeah, I got pregnant.
It did happen, yeah.
Yeah. And then I had been thinking to myself, so by the time I had gone through the program and I had my placement and I was assistant store manager, I started, you know, just kind of getting a different calling to do something that felt more natural to me. So that was around the time when there were several folks from the Somali community relocating to the Lewiston, Auburn area, and I started to look into real estate as a potential way to kind of stabilize myself while I made that transition. And also, while making that transition, I was also considering going back to school and all sorts of things. I don't know why I wanted to do all that at once. But yeah, I went back to school while I was pregnant to get my master's in public policy and management, because as I got more deeply into real estate and understanding the different facets of community and economic development and how they shape people's kitchen table, I wanted to understand that more as an investor. How can I be a part of like the solution rather than the problem? And when I started working, it was shortly after 9/11 happened, and I can't remember exactly like what was the exact motivation, but I know when September 11th happened, that made me think about community infrastructure and the volume of African Muslims coming to Maine and what that actually meant. How are these communities going to be supported and developed? And so it's all coming back to me now. So that at that point, before I went back to school for my master's, I went to get my certificate in nonprofit management to kind of see if going towards my master's would actually be something that I want to do.
Okay.
Because I wanted to be able to be a part of creating the structures for the community that would give some level of permanency and stability, and just being able to understand everything, you know, how like our policies interact with our everyday lives. It was pretty fascinating to me, you know, just how much our policy decisions can shape whether someone eats or doesn't eat, or whether someone has a home or doesn't have a home. It was fascinating and ridiculous all at once.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like in the mix there and in those transitional times that you told me, you decided you never really wanted to work for anyone else again.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's also, you know, something that my dad instilled into me. He was like, you know, if you never have to work for someone, don't. And I think that was just after years of him, you know, not really having any real autonomy over his life, and having to depend on others. He always ingrained in us that like you can create a business out of anything, you know, and he would always say, you have a great mind. You can make money just off the way you think. And I used to think, well, that's cool. And so that's why I started, after I graduated from the Muskie School, started consulting full time. And that was the way of me making money off my mind, you know.
What's your dad's name?
Clifford Muhammad.
Clifford Muhammad.
Senior, yeah. He passed away this February.
That's right.
Yeah.
Blessings to your family and
Yes.
to the memory of your father. That's awesome. I know that you started to put a lot of these things together. You had already started thinking about real estate. And so I wanted to ask, where did you start investing and how'd that go?
Well, we started investing in Lewiston. So I decided not to, you know, use my income while I was working for Hannaford's, put that aside, and We bought our first property, my husband and I, in Lewiston, 2001, 2002. I can't quite remember.
Yep.
And then because there was such an influx of individuals to the area, they were looking for safe, affordable housing. And there was an abundance of properties available in the Lewiston area. And so we purchased more. And then people were asking for more because we thankfully had a reputation for having nice apartments that were safe and affordable.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just kind of kept at it. And since I was originally living in Old Orchard Beach and we had moved to Lewiston, so now it was our home. We wanted to make sure that, we're a part of improving the community that we actually live in.
Yes.
So, yeah, so that was where we initially started investing.
Came to Maine, you start building into the communities, changed your career, looking for something that really fit you, that put together a lot of your skills.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I want to start to talk about the vision for Third Place.
Okay.
And how that came about. Started in 2016, early 2017.
Mm-hmm.
There was kind of an original structure or maybe not so much structure. Talk about why it started, Third Place.
Yeah, so we had this property in Portland that one of the suites became vacant, and there were a number of folks who were freelancers or consultants or leads on different nonprofit initiatives that needed space. And that was at a time where folks were starting to get priced out of Portland's office market. And so we decided, why don't we come together and provide space for folks who needed it? And then as we looked at it further, we were like, okay, well, what can we do for each other? How can we share expertise? Can we share different talents and stuff and go from there? So we had, some nonprofit organizations, some, folks who had for-profit businesses who just kind of came together, helping support each other. And it just kind of that was very informal. We didn't have a formal designation as a nonprofit organization. It was just folks doing stuff at that point. And we started looking at other ways we could support the community. And I had been doing a lot of work as a consultant, primarily for ethnic and community-based organizations and municipalities.
Okay.
And there was a big gap in the way we were serving communities of color.
What was the gap?
The gap was that we weren't really treating communities of colors as assets and really organizing ourselves in a way that really showcased the skills and talents that were in our own community. And one of the things that really punctuated that is the number of people of color who would come to this state, the number of professionals who would come to the state, stay maybe 1 to 2 years and leave because there was no social or cultural infrastructure to support them outside of the workplace.
Outside of the workplace.
Yes.
Right. Very important to differentiate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So companies, they were having great success recruiting, but retaining wasn't a workplace issue. Retention was a after hours problem.
And I think it's critical to just pause and point that out because, in this day and age of DEI work and diversity and organizations that are committed at different levels, but many of them truly are committed, exploring, having uncomfortable moments, there still remains the fact that all the best DEI work in the world at your job won't make the state home for you.
Absolutely. I mean, that was where people were finding that Maine wasn't for them. They weren't connecting to the outdoors. They weren't connecting to other professionals in their fields. They just weren't connecting, and there was no mechanism to bring them together. And I say that, I don't want to say no, because there are a number of Black churches and other organizations that serve that need for a certain population.
Very importantly, yes.
But it's also just the volume of it and the frequency of just wanting to do things outside of those types of environments that wasn't there.
How did you come up with the name, The Third Place?
Well, so in Lewiston, I got involved in planning for the downtown neighborhood area. And our actual plan for the area was called The Third Place. And the third place is essentially let's take it back a bit. The first place is considered the home, the second place, the workplace, and the third place are areas in the community where people connect. And so that felt very good to me. It's also the third place signifies just places that we're looking for. There's a lot of places that, so there's not a whole lot of Black-owned businesses that have physical infrastructure, but there are places where people can gather and connect to other people of color. And so our third places that we look for now are essentially places where we connect to business opportunities, where we connect to community in a way that is social, professional. So our third places can be anywhere, any place around the state.
Got you. But it's about that, creating that space for people to have that connection, but it can physically occur anywhere.
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely
tied to a certain geographical location.
Correct.
I like that. And part of the reason I like that is that I think that what happens in neighborhoods, I'm sure you could probably speak even deeper to this than I know how, but what happens with neighborhoods, like there's a lot of different reasons that people end up living around each other, a lot of influences on that. And sometimes that immediate geographical location right around your neighborhood, there can be issues that come with that. So you kind of need a different place sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm highlighting some of this because I know that some of our listeners, especially professionals that are trying to hire people or just expand in their communities, these are things that, your actual experience can benefit people who just don't know about. They just haven't even had a chance to explore that yet.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm just kind of picking apart some of those things.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that you were talking to me about getting the office space together and but there was kind of this push to kick the third place into another level.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
So it's particularly during COVID when everyone was feeling isolated, the people of color who were feeling isolated to begin with felt more isolated.
Facts.
And so we decided not to pull back on our social programming. So we did a lot of online gathering. We did the BIPOC Trivia Night, and we also did a few just kind of get to know you events online. And we really built the community from there. And so after everything opened up from COVID, we were like hitting the ground running. And that was a really special period because people really recognized that, we need to get organized on a different level. And,
yes.
And I think that was the beauty of that period, that people saw the necessity of it.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Tell me something that you're excited for moving forward for the third place.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited about all of our partnerships that are developing. I think that several businesses and corporations are really recognizing that they can't do, like you said, the DEI work alone internally. And so we organize in 10 different sectors, some of them being the environment, banking and financial services, healthcare, K through 12 education, higher education, media and communications, and others. And just, I love seeing people meet different, professionals in their own fields. It feels very rewarding to see people come together around projects, come together to just mentor each other. Yeah. And show each other the ropes. That is the most rewarding to me because with those different sector networks that are developing, it feels like it's moving towards a greater permanency. And we actually are building an infrastructure where other businesses and corporations can get involved in those networks and really do DEI on the outside.
Yes.
So it's also, they're connecting to communities outside of the workplace, but also providing a place where, individuals that come into their companies can connect as well. So it's really exciting to me to see our value being really demonstrated by the increasing number of partnerships that are developing.
Absolutely. And the third place is centered on BIPOC folks in these different sectors, right? For them, the sectors meet up at different times, at different situations, so they can focus on things that make sense to them. How many folks are in the network?
I haven't checked the numbers recently because we've had other people connect. But since we have started doing our networking events and stuff, we've connected to over 700 BIPOC professionals in some way. So at least they've either connected through sector networking events or our campus networking events, which is our cross-sector networking opportunities, or through community events. So we can, and there's so many people who have not connected, which is the thing, which is exciting to find those people I found a couple architects, folks who were architects the other day, and I remember speaking to an architectural firm who has said, that they don't know any Black architects in the state, and I was excited to find them.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah,
and it's one of those things too. It's so interesting being a Black person in the state of Maine. Obviously, we hear a lot about how there's not so many Black people, this and that, but like in my world, Maine has a lot of Black people. I don't mean Maine is full of Black people, but like seriously, Maine has a lot of Black people, a lot of working professionals. I'm sure there's people listening who just hadn't fathomed, wait, there's more than 700 Black working professionals in Maine?
Yeah.
Yes, there's way more than that, actually. So it is important for us to have this conversation out loud.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And folks connect with us from as far away as East Millinocket, Ellsworth area. I mean, when we first came, it was folks were coming out of the woodwork saying that they'd been here 20, 30 years waiting to connect with other people of color, which to me was, pretty amazing.
Absolutely amazing. And that's why I really want to make that point, because let's say people are spread out, or if Black people in Maine feel sparse, that could be. Sparse does not mean non-existent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or non-impactful.
Yeah. And we're trying to eliminate that sparsity too, because we're developing regional networks. And we actually have our first regional network outside of the Lewis and Auburn area and Portland area developing up in Bangor. So it's a number of Black and BIPOC-led organizations that are coming together to kind of concentrate their impact, bring their impact together. So
right on.
That's exciting as well.
It is. It is exciting. And speaking of excitement, reflection on kind of what we've accomplished, I always like to set the stage here for a second. How much we value ourselves, love ourselves, our self-worth is not really related to our actions. It's just about who we are as people. But I always like to take a moment for you to talk a little bit to us about a couple moments in the state of Maine since you've been here working where you felt honored or where you were recognized publicly for some of the work.
I was recently recognized as Maine Biz Woman to Watch in 2021, a Maine Biz Woman to Watch. And that recognition came primarily because of my work with the Third Place. Additionally, in 2022, I was one of the Maine Magazine's Mainers of the Year. And again, that was because of my work with the Third Place. And I think that recognition is not my own. And I've tried to, reiterate wherever folks may say and recognize me for my work. But I couldn't do this if people wouldn't actually show up.
Facts.
Yes. If people didn't show up and trust me to lead them, then I wouldn't be where I am. So it's a very heavy weight that I carry. Because I do understand that now that the organization has really taken off, that there's a community of people who I represent, and that's scary. that's pretty scary, and because you want to represent them well, you want to make sure that the organization remains something that is beneficial to them, and I actually really love doing what I do. Meeting people every day. It's always new people. Every time we have, whether it's a social event or a professional event with the chamber or, just a community event, it's always new people. Always new people.
Maine Community Foundation. Tell me a little bit about working with Maine Community Foundation.
Well, it's been amazing. I recently became the chair of the Maine Community Foundation Board of Directors.
Okay.
And through that work, I've been able to really see the impact of, philanthropic dollars across the state of Maine. There's so many different ways that the foundation has created impact in the communities that would not have been apparent to me had I not been a part of the organization. So,
give an example of how Maine Community Foundation does impact the community.
Yeah, so, Maine Community Foundation provides several grants and scholarship opportunities, communities throughout the state, and also provides a level of community leadership in the areas of things that we can't provide funding on. We provide leadership on.
We keep the central point going on the podcast. What do you think, feel, and sense for Maine's Black future?
I think Maine's Black future is bright. We are in a place in Maine's Black history where we can have a significant impact in the actual institutions and structures that are reshaping themselves. I think that we live in a state where people are actually trying to do the work. And we're small enough where the work can be done and checked and evaluated in tandem with the community. So I think that 20 years from now, we'll be integrated in a way that feels right for our community if we continue to really pull our Black and BIPOC-led organizations together in a way that is ongoing. I think that we're working together in a way that feels good. But that's not to say there's a lot of work that is not yet to be done. There's still a lot of work to be done. But I feel like just Maine is different in the way that institutions are ready to engage. Not all of them, but many of them are ready to engage. Yeah, we're small enough to be able to be nimble and get into the communities and get into those structures that aren't as easy to get into in other places. I mean, I was telling someone the other day, like, the degrees of separation between myself and people in power is zero. You know, I would never have this level of access to people in power, CEOs, elected officials, if I were in Georgia. It just wouldn't happen. Yeah, and I think the level of proximity to people, problems, and the power and the solutions is right in our backyards.
I appreciate you shouting those things out, helping us project that into Maine's Black future. And I think that what you point out is critical. Maine is unique. We have unique opportunity here to create connection that is simply more difficult in other places, might not even be possible in other places. And I think that we have to continue to capitalize on that. And of course, just live life the way it should be, but really to create that life the way it should be in Maine. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking this time to be with my audience and with me, of course. I appreciate you for that.
I appreciate you.
Could you send us out? I can tell that your dad has taught you many lessons. Could you share something with us?
So my dad always said, like, you know, learn how to make money with your head, your hands, and your heart. And I think that the third place for me kind of brings all of that together. It's primarily my heart. And real estate has been my very hands-on endeavor. And then my consulting work, which was primarily with ethnic and community-based organizations, was my head work. And I think now that I'm able to really bring all those pieces together in my life, I feel like a level of completeness that I hadn't had before, because all of them are really tied together. All of them kind of led to where I am now. And so it gives me a better perspective on how to show up in neighborhoods, in communities, how to reach out to people, whether that be at their front door, you know, me coming and trying to understand a tenant's situation. That's no different from me trying to understand what my community's needs are, or, you know, a client's needs are. You know, that process looks a little different, but it's pretty much the same. And so that level of knowing how to show up, when to show up, what to say is important in being able to really authentically give a person or a community what they need. I'm always taking my dad's advice, which it really isn't advice. It's just me watching him. He never met a stranger. No matter how or where he met them, he would always be able to talk to anybody. He wasn't intimidated by a wealthy person, and he wasn't intimidated by the homeless person on the street. He always approached the person the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
They have a story to tell. I'm going to find out who this person is, and we're going to connect in some way. And that's what I really loved about my dad. And I dig into that a lot now that I'm kind of thrust into this position where I'm meeting people on different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, you name it. Trying to show up authentically as myself and being able to lead with my hands, my head, and my heart.